Hey Triple Fivers, I've got a quiet night at the house tonight and it's going to be a little bit of show and tell. I want to talk about my long-term experience owning a very affordable modern Rolex. Basically, I'm going to tell the story of how I went about finding a very reasonably priced, very cheap Rolex Air-King from 1998. It's a 1400 series Rolex with the sapphire crystal and a modern 3000 series movement. It's a watch that is very accessibly priced for a modern Rolex. I actually got mine for $1,600. Now, when I got the watch, there was a bunch of baggage with it that I knew about when I was getting into it, and as a long-term reviewer and as a long-term collector, I figured that I would be able to manage it and figure out what was wrong with it and get the things that needed to be fixed. All right, guys, here she is. You've seen it before. If you're a subscriber here, this is my Rolex Air-King 1400 series. This one is from 1998 in particular. It falls into the category of modern Rolex because of the sapphire crystal. As you can see, it has this big, flat, beveled sapphire crystal, very pretty. And its modern Rolex movement, which has this higher beat rate of approximately 28,800 beats per hour. And so it's a modern Rolex, but it's modern in the same way that we sort of describe fuel-injected cars as modern from 20 years ago. It is definitely not as sophisticated as the newest Rolexes in a variety of ways, but had some of the features that I was looking for. I wanted the higher beat movement and I wanted the sapphire crystal. I like Air-Kings. The current Air-King doesn't interest me at all, but this Air-King seems to be very classic Rolex with the black dial, stainless case, and of course the Air-King moniker, which goes all the way back to 1945. I also love that it's a time-only model. The fact that it's just a precision model and not a chronometer also I think is cool. It was back in the day when Rolex was confident enough to throw out some of these precision non-chronometer grade movements. And as you guys know, this is the second Rolex Air-King that I've owned. I owned one about 5 years ago, really enjoyed it. Didn't wear it enough and sold it because I wasn't wearing it. And the reason why I ended up deciding I wasn't wearing it was not only just because it was my first Rolex and I had kind of scared wrist syndrome where I was afraid to wear a more expensive watch even though I had owned a number of Omegas and Breitlings. The reason why I wasn't wearing it is because I really didn't like the coin edge bezel that was on my previous Air-King. It was a 14010 series rather than a 1400 series, and so I opted this time around to just go ahead and get the smooth bezel, and I'm glad I did because for whatever reason this watch just seems to go under the radar a lot better. This is a 34mm watch on my 7¼ inch wrist. If you've seen the watch in a number of videos, it looks a little small on me, but honestly, you know, small watches are back, and objectively speaking, I think the proportions still work. I just don't have any problem wearing a smaller watch these days, especially considering most of the time I'm wearing formal wear. Okay, so at this point you're probably thinking, all right, Andrew, that's a reasonable but kind of mundane explanation about why you got a Rolex Air-King from 20 years ago. And yeah, that's fair enough. I think things get a lot more interesting when I talk about how I sort of tried to play the system. And in order for you to understand my perspective on this, you have to understand that I could have easily paid, you know, $2,300 or $2,500 and gotten an example of this Rolex, you know, maybe with box and papers from a reputable dealer, probably service. But I just didn't want to spend that extra $500 or so, and so I thought I will just find a Rolex that needs to be serviced and I'll send it to a place that I know will service it myself, and I'll have it taken care of right away as soon as I get it, so that I can have a freshly serviced Rolex with no questions about when it was serviced or who did the servicing or anything like that, which to me sounded pretty reasonable actually at the time, especially considering that I found an example which was the exact specifications of the watch that I was looking for. Smooth bezel, black dial. Pretty easy to find, admittedly. It's not like it's a rare Rolex. But anyway, so I went ahead on eBay and I found the watch I was looking for, paid for it, got it, and it came with a variety of problems. The first problem that was most noticeable is there was a slight chip in the crystal. Yes, these sapphire crystals, especially the flat beveled ones, are prone to chipping. It happens for sure. The other problem that was more significant was the movement was not working. In fact, the watch couldn't even be wound. It wasn't keeping time at all. And so I had someone on a forum who I trusted, who had a connection to a former Rolex repair service person, a watchmaker who had formerly just worked on Rolexes and only fixed watches with actual OEM Rolex parts. And so I sent the watch off to that person. So anyway, this is where my quote-unquote played the system line is coming from. Basically the idea that whether or not they're telling you, a lot of watch resellers, whether they're on forums or they have their little websites, and I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, what they're doing is they're finding cheap examples of watches that their watchmakers can service, and then they're able to resell them as recently serviced. If they're an otherwise good example and they know that they can replace the watches defective parts or get it running properly, it's really a smart value proposition. In fact, I think it's one of the ways that a lot of the vintage watch resellers basically run their whole business model, which is finding examples on eBay, refurbishing them, and then reselling them. I've seen it happen for years that way. I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that, but at any rate, I knew that was going on, and I just didn't want to be part of the rat race there. I didn't want to just have to end up buying this from some forum member who had done the exact same thing that I know I could go do myself. And so anyway, the watch got sent off to this reputable Rolex independent watchmaker, and I paid quite a bit of money because I got the crystal replaced and the movement serviced. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it was somewhere to the tune of $400, which is getting close to what you'd be paying just to get it serviced at Rolex, which in retrospect, that would be the one thing I would have changed, is I would have actually just sent it to Rolex right away to get serviced, because I think they would have been able to replace the crystal and service the movement better than what my experience was with this movement. So this is where things started to go a little bit south. So the Rolex was serviced by this reputable, recommended Rolex watchmaker with OEM parts. It received a new crystal, and it received a new mainspring, and it received some new gears. I don't know exactly what gears were replaced off the top of my head, since it was nearly a year ago, but it was all detailed very specifically in the order, and I ponied up for it and had the watch sent back to me with full insurance and everything. So I was expecting a watch to come back perfectly in good order, and I would have my Rolex Air-King recently serviced for $2,000, and I thought that would be pretty sweet. Well, unfortunately, it came back and it was magnetized. And it probably happened through the postal service, but it was running really fast, so fast that it was pretty much useless. Like, I was going to have to reset it a couple times a day. So I contacted this watchmaker, and of course he requested that I send it back. And they looked at it again, and they serviced it, adjusted the magnetism problem, which, you know, I could have tried doing myself. I do have a demagnetizer in my basement, but it's just one of those things that, since I was spending the money to get it fixed right, I was just thinking I would go ahead and have them do the work. It made sense to me. So I did, and the watch came back. So now you're probably thinking, all right, well, there you go. You spent the money, you had to take your time waiting for it to get serviced, and now you've got a great working watch on your wrist, and it's the end of story, happy ending, huh? Well, kind of. Within a month of me getting the watch back after getting the second service, even though it was keeping very accurate time, I noticed that it wasn't winding very well. And in particular, there was one day where I'm pretty sure I hit my wrist pretty hard up against a side of a door. I honestly don't remember exactly, but I was wearing the watch all the time, very actively, even when I was getting exercise and wrestling with my kids and just kind of horsing around the house, and you know, stuff that people do with Rolexes all the time. And I just figured, what the heck, I'm going to just wear it. Well, anyway, so the watch is still keeping time right now, but as of today, which is, we're talking mid-October 2018, it needs to be hand wound whatever 3 days, and the rotor's pretty noisy. So even though I spent all this money getting it serviced and running properly, very shortly after getting the watch back, it just has not been functioning at 100%. And I haven't gotten it serviced again because I wasn't sure if it was my fault, and I'm kind of frustrated. I'm definitely experiencing some service fatigue with this watch, and I can wind it, and it's fine. It works very accurately when it is wound every few days, but I'm definitely intending to take it to a watchmaker to get the problem taken care of properly soon. And so, what are the lessons that you can get from this? Let's talk about that. All right, so then what are the takeaways of my travails of getting this Rolex Air-King, buying it for so cheap and then still not having it exactly working the way that I would hope that it would be working? Well, the first lesson is if you're buying a watch intending to keep it like I was, none of this is a deal breaker. So eventually I'll get the watch fixed again properly, and it'll be fine, and I'll probably wear the watch for 10 years after that and not worry about a service. If you're not willing to play the waiting game, it is probably just worth the money to find an example of a watch that doesn't have any issues at all. There's also some peace of mind about that because you're getting a watch that's been taken care of its whole life. 20 years old for a watch is pretty old at this point, and even though this is a modern Rolex, the idea of buying a watch that's had 20 years of hard use is assuming a lot of risks, and I admit straight away that I knew that out of the gate, and that is probably not for everybody. The other thing I would recommend is if you are willing to assume the risk and you want to try taking this risk of finding a really cheap modern Rolex, and you could pick a different model, pick like a 36mm Rolex Explorer, find one that needs a service or is running fast, or it's just a head and not a bracelet or something. You can get it, $3,000 or a little under $3,000 on forums. You should probably just get serviced by Rolex right away. That would be my recommendation, at least, that if you don't know how deep the problems are going to go, and if it goes to Rolex, it's going to come back. The last thing that I'd say that I learned about this that I think is always a valuable lesson for watch collectors is don't take yourself too seriously. I thought I had a neat little plan to save me some cash, maybe a few $100s in the end, and have a watch on my wrist, and here I am a year later, and I'm telling the story of what's still going wrong with the watch here on YouTube, and that's okay. Like, that's something that I accept as part of the process. It's not the end of the world for me. I'm still enjoying the watch for what it is, and eventually it'll get all ironed out, and I'm sure that I'm going to enjoy it for a long time after that as well. Okay guys, don't roast me too much in the comments, but give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this. I would appreciate it if you subscribe. Leave a comment down below if you have any watch horror stories, things that you think would be worth sharing on a video like this. And just know that as a seasoned watch collector, there are still tactical mistakes that you can make, and it's not the end of the world. And you can even wear a watch that's imperfect and still really enjoy it, which has been my experience. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed this, and happy hunting.